Later in the hour, we're going to talk about Big Ten expansion, but we're going to shift gears a little bit right now and talk some Lions football because we're just 8 days away from the Lions heading to Soldier Field and opening up against the Chicago Bears, their NFC North rival. Preseason, it feels like it takes 8 weeks and not 4. It's finally over, but one guy who has helped me personally get through preseason, he is the beat writer for the Detroit Lions and MLive.com, and he's been working tirelessly, I know, all preseason long. Tom Kowalski is joining us right now on Mom FM. Tom, how you doing today?
Good, Kevin. How are you?
I'm doing terrific, and we're just really ready for some football that matters, Tom. And I'm sure you're ready for some football that matters too. And Tom, we'll start off kind of looking at the big picture of things. Do you feel better about this Detroit Lions football team today than you did the day before training camp started?
Yeah, there are a lot of things about this team that you've got to like. The offense is I think, pretty much set. I think that they're going to be good there. I think that they can compete with anybody in the league offensively. However, defensively, even though that they did upgrade the defensive line and did a good job there, they're really lacking a linebacker in the secondary. So I don't think they're going to win a ton of games this year, but clearly this is a lot better football team than it was last year.
We're talking to Tom Kowalski. He's the Lions beat writer for MLive.com. And we'll start on that defensive side of the ball because I think that's where a lot of the questions marks are at, just like you talked about, Tom. And talk about that linebacker core. I mean, we all know the secondary is going to struggle, but the linebackers are probably the position on the defense that needs to step up. If that defensive line is going to be solid, we need the linebackers also to play well to kind of make up for the lack of talent in the secondary. You got Julian Peterson, a guy you hope that steps up this year. DeAndre Levy is a guy that we started leaning on pretty heavily for a guy who only had one good season. And then, of course, on the other side, you're relying on maybe Zach Follett, a guy who just a year ago was a 7th-round draft pick. But you have the injury to Jordan Dizon. Things look pretty grim for me in that linebacker core. Who maybe are some guys that we're not talking about yet that could step up and kind of fill that gap?
Well, that's just the problem. I don't think there is anybody there. The depth, like you said, is very, very weak. Landon Johnson, it was kind of interesting. He is now stepping in for DeAndre Levy, who may not play the opener because of a groin injury, and he hasn't practiced almost the entire camp, so you're not even sure what he's going to have when he does come back. And Landon Johnson's going to take his spot, and I thought Landon Johnson might be pressuring Zach Follett for the spot out there. So if something happens to Follett, they're really thin. Follett has not played well in preseason, no question about it. That's not totally unexpected for a guy who's new to a starting position because it's almost like a paralysis by analysis. He's still feeling his way, getting the scheme down, things like that. So he's not playing very fast. He's missing some tackles. That's not like him. But yeah, there's an issue there.
Talking to Tom Kowalski, the Lions beat writer for MLive.com here on Mom FM. Kevin O'Brien, Noah Jensen, and Chris Jeroman live in studio. The linebacker core's questions, just as many questions, are in the defensive backfield, Tom. And one guy that the Lions hope to count on a lot is Louis Delmas, the second-year player who had such a terrific rookie season and showed a lot of promise, but he's missed a lot of camp. He really hasn't been on the field at all with a groin injury as well. What's the status of Delmas, and what's the status of that secondary? Do you think there's more problems in the secondary or the linebacker core?
Well, I think clearly I think the secondary is going to be the biggest issue. I mean, except for Delmas and Amari Spivey, you've got nothing but a bunch of cast-offs, guys who have been, either cut or traded by other teams. Chris Houston was traded by the Falcons. Even though he was a 3-year starter, there's a reason they felt they could let him go. Jonathan Wade was a guy who got benched last year in St. Louis. They let him go as a free agent. And the thing with Delmas, the guy who's kind of, the one anchor that they could have back there, that groin injury has been going on for more than a couple of months now. So, and he's only played one preseason game. He still can't practice 2-3 days in a row. So I think he's basically a ticking time bomb. If you think that they can count on him for a full 16 games, I think you're mistaken. I think he's hurt. I think this thing is going to linger through the season, and at some point it's going to really start affecting his play. That's the way I see it. I know that they're hoping for the best, that this thing will eventually correct itself. But based on what we've seen so far, Kevin, I think you've got to look at that and say that's a real question mark, and you really can't count on Louis Delmas for the entire season.
Tom, staying with that running back, question marks. Obviously, there's a lot of things going on in the Detroit backfield right now. You just talked about it with Kevin Smith. But Javid Best had a very impressive preseason. But one thing when he was coming out of college, a lot of people wondered, with his durability, could he be a back that you could rely on for 20-plus carries in a game? Now that you've had a chance to watch him in camp a little bit, and we've seen him a little bit in the preseason, do you think he's the kind of back that you can rely on for a lot of carries? Or is he going to be more of an explosive guy that you just kind of use maybe 15 carries and throw to a couple of times out of the backfield?
Well, I think they want both. I mean, I think they want him to be that explosive guy, and they want him to touch it 18 to 22 times a game. Look, I think one of the big things about his durability factor was the concussion late last year, where he missed a bunch of games. He missed the bowl game. I do believe he could have come back and played, but I think that they made the decision that, and I think it was the right decision, because if he had just happened to have another concussion, let's say in the final game of the season, or Cal's bowl game, then his draft stock would have plummeted, because it would have been two concussions relatively close together. I think they wanted to make sure that he was okay going into the draft. So I don't really buy the whole durability thing. And the thing that Schwartz said, which I also agree with, is when he was in Tennessee, they drafted Chris Johnson, who is a $185. Now he's a little bit heavier, and they said, let's wait and see what this kid can do before we tell him what he can do, because no one thought that he'd be able to carry the workload as much as he has. So I think that the Lions are going to take the same wait-and-see approach, and they're going to see how he does. If he starts to slow down, if the pounding starts to wear on him, I think they'll pull back a little bit. But I don't think they're going to put the reins on this kid before they have to, and I think that's the right thing to do.
Yeah, I think a lot of people even think Javid Best is a little bit smaller than he actually is. He's actually a pretty big guy, but the durability issues, of course, concern you, probably just because we're Lions fans and we're waiting for something to go wrong. We know someone who looks like they're definitely in the upswing, Tom, and who's receiving a lot of national attention for a guy who might really break out is Matthew Stafford, the face of this organization. Now, I'm a Lions fan. I drink the Kool-Aid every single year, just like the rest of us. I like what I saw to Stafford sometimes last year, but there were games when he really made a lot of bad decisions and he really struggled. I know there's a lot of things that go into that. The offensive line wasn't there. Other than Calvin Johnson, he didn't have a legitimate threat at receiver. But still, he struggled last year, and I think a lot of the talk this year has Matthew Stafford kind of playing a little bit better than he actually did in his rookie season. Is that because, Tom, he has played so well in the preseason and so well in this camp? What have you seen from Matthew Stafford that has garnered such national hype?
Well, I tell you what, it's funny, because I've just been going through some of these other first overall pick quarterbacks. Eli Manning, Peyton Manning. Peyton Manning was 3-13 his first year, threw 28 interceptions. The next year he was 13-3 and threw 15 interceptions. It's a tough game to learn. You've got to go through it. You've got to experience it. You've got to understand what you're facing, and there's no substitute except that playing experience. Now, he's coming into his second year, so you've got that huge benefit from that. Plus, now you've got all these additional weapons. They didn't have a running game last year. Now, though, that defense, when you go back and look at the tape last year, on most plays, those linebackers were bailing out at the snap of the ball because it was the pass, usually to Calvin Johnson. They felt Stafford throwing the ball was so much more of a danger than running the ball. It was almost a win for the defense whenever Kevin Smith or somebody else touched the ball. So now you can't do that. With Javid Best in the backfield, those linebackers have to stay where they're at. They have to respect the run. That's going to help him tremendously. Having two tight ends now who are both, Pettigrew's a blocking and receiving threat, and Scheffler's a receiving threat, that's going to help him tremendously, because now he doesn't have to fixate on Calvin Johnson, and he can go a lot of other places with the ball, which I think you've seen in preseason, and that's why people are looking at this kid and saying, okay, this kid could be the real deal. He doesn't fixate on Calvin Johnson. He knows where to go with the ball, and he gets rid of it quickly.
Talking to Tom Kowalski here on Mom FM about the Lions season, just 8 days away before they head to Chicago, Soldier Field, and take on Jay Cutler and the Bears. Tom, taking a look at this coaching staff. They're in their second year now, Jim Schwartz and company, and Martin Mayhew leading the way with Tom Lewan as the president. You've seen a lot of coaching staffs in your time covering the Detroit Lions, and you've seen a lot of coaching staffs come and go, and you've heard the rhetoric, you've heard them talk. What impression have you gotten from this coaching staff? How are they different from the ones who have failed in Detroit before?
Well, we don't know. We don't know if they're going to be any different. That's the thing. The thing I said about Schwartz was last year that Vince Lombardi couldn't have done much with that team. There just wasn't any talent there. So we really didn't see what edge that Schwartz could give them. I know that I heard a lot of people saying after the Super Bowl, why doesn't Schwartz do what Sean Payton did? Take that risk with the onside kick, take some chances. Well, the thing is that team was so bad last year that it would have been really a horrible deal for the coach to take some of those chances, because if they didn't work, now you're putting your team into a further hole. Sean Payton had the luxury of having a very good football team that if he made a strategic mistake, they had enough talent where they could overcome it. This team couldn't do that. That's what we've got to see out of Schwartz. I like the coordinators. They both have a history. They don't have a very good history of being head coaches, but they have a great history of being coordinators. Linehan, obviously, everybody saw what he did in Minnesota with a quarterback who really wasn't very good. I mean, as soon as Culpepper left at Linehan, his career went down the drain. So clearly Linehan knows how to get the most out of his quarterbacks, and Gunther's had some great defenses, especially in Kansas City, worked with Schwartz in Tennessee. So it's just continuing the process, continuing to be consistent with your scheme, and then we'll see down the road when this team gets better how good the coaches are and if they can make those moves to get them over the hump.
Tom, you wrote for MLive yesterday that the cuts for the Lions that are going to take place sometime today, it appears, really shouldn't be as important as previous years. You wrote that there's going to be a revolving door kind of at the bottom of this roster. Do you think there's going to be any surprises today, though? Is there anything that's going to make Lions fans say, wow, I didn't think that was going to happen? You talked about Kevin Smith earlier. You don't think he's going to be cut. But around the football, in the past couple of days, we've seen some surprising things. Antonio O'Brien getting cut, TJ Hushmanzada getting cut. Are there any surprises like that waiting for the Lions?
No, I don't think there are. I think there'll be some guys who are on the bubble who look. I think there are going to be some guys who can play in the league at certain positions. I think they've got some guys at defensive tackle, receiver, running back, offensive tackle. I think they've got some guys who, if they make some cuts, that can go play for somebody else. So yeah, there are going to be guys who are cut who are good football players, but I don't see any shockers coming. I really don't. And again, the point I was trying to make about how the 53-man roster isn't that big a deal is because they're going to continue to massage the bottom of the roster as we go forward. There are going to be a lot of waiver claims tomorrow. They're going to be looking at other free agents and guys like that in the next week or two. So just because you made that last 2 or 3 spots on the roster, it doesn't mean you're going to be there for very long.
Talking to Tom Kowalski here on Mom FM. Tom, before we let you go, I want to ask about the story that kind of dominated the news, probably because we were heading into the last preseason game, and it's really the only thing to talk about. But Ndamukong Suh almost took Jake Delhomme's head off in the third preseason game, and he got fined $7,500 for it and didn't get suspended, thankfully for Lions fans. But what's the feeling in the organization about that play by Suh and the response from Suh? And how personally, as a fan of this team and a person who wants to see his team succeed, do you feel about Suh's response to that of, he was, didn't want to hurt the guy, but at the same time, he wasn't very apologetic about it.
Well, so yeah, I think that was it. Look, it was a dumb play, and he knows it. You cannot, basically it's funny, $7,500, it's only $2,500 for the 3 personal fouls that he committed on the play. I mean, he had the face mask, he had the illegal blow to the head, and then he had the driving the quarterback into the ground. So he got his money's worth out of it. What I liked about the whole situation was Suh's response to it. The Seneca Wallace, the backup Browns quarterback, said he should be suspended and all that. And he basically said, I don't care. My job is not to worry about whether quarterbacks get hurt or not. I can't make stupid mistakes, but I'm not going to basically apologize for going after the quarterback. I love that mentality. They haven't had that enough because they haven't had the talented players to talk like that. So I like the fact that they're very aggressive, and if it's going to call, and here's the other thing. You know what? Everybody looks at that on film. Everybody sees those shots. And so if you develop that attitude, that reputation of being a very aggressive, kind of a chippy team, I think that only helps you in the third and fourth quarters of very close ball games.
Yeah, I'm not worried about Suh's pocketbook, definitely, and I'm hoping he makes a lot more money in Detroit because I don't think we've had a player like that in a long time. Tom, before we let you go, how about a prediction for the season? I know you've probably been asked about it a lot, but it's a tough schedule. I was looking at it yesterday, and it's playing that NFC East and playing the AFC East. It's going to be tough. A lot of tough road games, a lot of tough home games. So what kind of win total are you looking at for this Lions team?
Well, I'm going to stick with my record of 4-12, and even though people think that that's actually absolutely horrific, I will remind them that this team was 0-16 just a couple of years ago, and it takes a while to build a competitive NFL roster. They are trending upward at a remarkable pace, if you ask me. But what's going to kill them? That offense is going to score a ton of points. What's going to kill them in games, and why I don't think they're going to win a lot, is that defense is so bad and so vulnerable to fourth quarter comebacks that no lead is going to be safe this year, and they're going to face some pretty good quarterbacks. So they're going to be much better. They're going to be a lot of fun to watch. Believe me, this is not going to be your same old Lions. They're going to be fun to watch on Sunday. The problem is going to be that they're going to lose a lot in the end. So I'm going to stick with 4-12 until I'm convinced otherwise.
Depth is obviously a huge issue all over this Lions team. So, Tom Killer Kowalski, thanks a lot for joining us, and hopefully we'll talk to you soon here in the Lions season. Hopefully we're talking about a couple wins as well. Thanks a lot for joining us today, Tom.